Hi folks, Chuck Black here, the author of Quokka that you may be using to learn how to become a software developer slash programmer slash coder. This lesson is going to be about how to migrate from a previous version of Quokka that we made available via VM or OVA to a new version. And at the end of this, if you do wait all the way through it or wade all the way through it, then you may say to yourself, well, that's a lousy upgrade strategy. And I would say to you, well, I agree 100%. That's why Quokka is not a product. It is a teaching and training tool. This is what you will be going through if you are a software developer. If you're just a consumer of applications, then you click on a button and things get updated. But this is not that environment. This is intentionally an environment for you to learn how software works. Now, I will be going in this lesson through a couple of ways to upgrade to a new version of Quokka. The easiest way is going to be just to start using the new VM and then modifying anything that you might have modified in your previous version. So if you've modified devices to point at some of your own devices, if you set different services or whatever, it's not a huge deal. It may not be a huge deal to enter that stuff in all again if you choose to do that. There are reasons why you may want to consider that, and I will go through that. That is the easiest and simplest way. Now, if you wanted to do it the more software developy way, then you can take your current VM on which you've made modifications, etc. I recommend that you clone it first. So I've cloned it here, and then I begin to go through some git commands in order to save off the stuff that you've done yourself, to pull down the new version of software from the GitHub repository where Quokka lives, and then to reinstall your changes, that would be a git stash pop, onto the newer stuff, and crossing fingers, hoping that it works fine and that there's no conflicts. As an alternative, you can do the update of the code, and then you'll have the code running on your laptop, and then you can manually do the updates by hand based on the stuff that you've saved. So those are kind of your alternatives for going to a new version. As I say, if you just want to experience the new functionality and learn how to write software, then this is probably the easiest thing to do. If you are a little bit more comfortable with using Git and doing other stuff and want to learn it, then maybe taking the original version on which you may have made modifications and attempting to do git stash, git pull, git stash pop, etc. may be the way to try it for you. Or you can always do both. Keep the new one for running and then attempt to do the other one. Anyway, that's what I'm going to be talking about. Hope you enjoy it, and I hope that it is beneficial to you. Okay, so you've got a new OVA representing the latest version of Quokka, and you want to understand how can you get it up and running and doing stuff. As you recall, the purpose of Quokka is to teach you how to develop software and to become a real live software developer, also known as programmer or coder, whatever you want to call it. And so there is no production pipeline for releasing new versions of Quokka. There's no supply chain. There's no migration of data, etc. It's just code that I've written that hopefully will teach you how to become a software developer yourself. That said, there will be updates to the code that we originally released a little while ago, and right about now is when we're going to be releasing a new version. And so you'll want to know, okay, well, what do I do with this? Well, I'm going to give you a few different options for how you can begin to use this new version of code. And the first one that I'm going to talk to you about is the easiest. The first thing you can do is you can download the OVA. There will be two of them this time. There will be the Quokka server, and then there will be a VM for remote workers. The only difference between these two, it's actually the same code, but on the worker, you'll only be running worker stuff, and therefore it runs in a much smaller amount of memory, probably even less than that if you had to push it. The original Quokka server I have set at 6 gig because you'll probably be using the IDE that's available there, or you might be. And there's actually, I can't remember if there, I think there's just PyCharm, which is the free version. So yeah, that's this is the easiest thing to do now. If you pull down the OVA and you import it just like you will have done on a previous version, what do you then need to do in order to get it running in your environment? Well, you'll need to do what you did before, which hopefully will be nothing or next to nothing. It's designed so that all you need to do is open a terminal window, do a run all, which is what I just did here, and it should work in your network, because for most of the functionality, excluding remote workers, we don't have any hard-coded IP addresses or subnets. And so I believe that this works. Now, I don't know that for sure because I run it on my network all the time, but I did do a little check, and I know that David has run it in his network and didn't require a lot of modifications. But it may be the case that your network, in your Quokka instance running on your network, that you want to point at your own devices or at different devices. See, I just have these sandbox devices that are out there in the cloud that we can get access to, and we all have access to that stuff. What if you have done modifications to that? Well, let me point you at the files that you'll probably need to change if that is the case. The files that you need to change is going to be the ones that you changed before, right? So you may have gone through devices.yaml and added your own. Now let me point something out to you. The reason that this is the easiest way to run the new version of Quokka is this. You see this data that is specified here. This may change, the type of data may change from version to version. In other words, there may be new fields in here that didn't exist before. I may remove fields, etc. And if you're using an older version, then you may not be specifying the correct fields. So it's safer to modify what's right here. The second reason is because this is just a file. It's the file that we found here under data, devices, and there's a services file, and there's a workers file, and there's also a compliance file. So all of these may be subject to change, and you would need to stay abreast of that, all right? So that is something that's important. The other thing is this. We are running with a real live database, right? So we have a Postgres database that has tables defined. If you have been going through the Quokka walkthrough, then you know that we're using an SQL database. Specifically in the version that you've got, we're using Postgres, which is open source, but it's a full-fledged database that a number of people use rather than paying money for an expensive one. And so the way that SQL works is you have tables defined, and it is very particular. If you attempt to load data that does not exist, or if you omit data that needs to exist, you may end up with database problems. And so this already has the database already set up for you. As you can see, it's running fine in the background, and as we looked at, you've got stuff going on here. We have device. I just started this a minute or two ago. You have compliance. It has discovered the hosts in my network. It's discovered 26 of them. It's doing these services. I think this is what it's probably going out with. I can't remember. I know I've changed these around a little bit. And it has remote workers, which are actually just the local host guys that start when you do run all over here. So changing on this, in this environment, you don't have to do anything. This is doing the thing that I mentioned, which was, let me pull this back up. This was just running the brand new VM. If you're just running the brand new VM, you don't have to worry about database changes. You don't have to worry about changes to this. It's already there. All you have to do is what you did before probably, which is add some new ones of these that point at your own device or however that might be. But the database tables are set up already for you. You would only have to worry about that if you're going to do a second method that I'm going to describe in a little while. So that would be my recommendation. First of all, is get this one up and running. Make sure it works the way you want it to. If you want to experiment with remote workers, then watch the video that I've created where I talk about how remote workers work and how you can use them. And I demonstrate actually running a remote worker in a different VM and having it communicate with the Quokka server. But this is the easiest way to do it. If you have changed this devices.yaml file, then make those changes in the same manner on this devices.yaml file. If you've modified the services, then make sure that you set those up the way that you want them to be. If you have compliance and you've set it up for your particular set of devices, then you'll want to be doing that as well. So that is the easiest way to do it. The best situation is initially everything comes up and it's running and it's happy and you're now running on the new version, and you can make your own modifications as you go through. So that's option number one and the easiest option. All right, so let's talk about the second alternative to upgrading to a new version of Quokka. Now, be advised that this is not a trivial exercise. If you're not familiar with software development functionality like Git, then you may have problems. May not be able to understand it. You may want to listen anyway just to see how hard it is, and maybe you want to attempt it. I will try to make it so that it won't be destructive to anything that you've done, but we will be going down a more software development-y path. So just be aware of that. Now, the first thing that I would do is this. We are going to try to download the new software onto our existing and potentially modified Quokka. So if you're someone who has made significant modifications and you don't want to lose it, maybe you've made configuration changes, maybe you have made actually code changes and you want to preserve those in some way, then you can attempt to do this. The first thing that I would do is this. We don't want to screw up this existing one that you've done. I'm assuming this is the one that you've been working on. So the first thing that we'll do is clone this virtual machine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to do a clone of this existing one. And by the way, I'm assuming that version 9 is what we sent out. I actually don't even remember whether it was version 9 or version 10. But whichever it is, it doesn't really make any difference. This instruction will be the same no matter what. So you can give it a different name if you want. You can call it upgraded or something. And you can just click next. You want to do a full clone. You don't want to link it in any way. And so I'm going to click clone. And it's going to begin to do its work cloning. And it's going to tell you how long it will take. See, it's got, what was it, Dolly the sheep? Is that why this is the cloning icon that they've got there? You can see the number of seconds remaining keeps going up. So I'm going to be quiet so that I can allow this to, I can speed this up so that you don't have to wait. Okay, so you can see we have the clone here, Quokka Ubuntu Clean V9 upgraded. And now the original one that may have had all of your specific changes is still good and clean and is not in danger of getting screwed up by anything that we do. And so I'm going to go ahead and start this, and then we're going to look at what we would be doing if we wanted to just upgrade in place using new code that's out there on the GitHub site. So let me start it. Okay, so here we are. We are on a cloned version of our existing Quokka VM. And What you may or may not know is that it is possible to actually pull down the latest code from the GitHub site. Now, I will be completely honest with you. I don't even know if this is going to work because I haven't done it before. So this is my first time attempting to do this. Of course, I am just updating it myself, so I'm always using Git to save things and to do branches, etc. But what I'm going to attempt to do here is I'm going to attempt to pull down the latest software from the GitHub site where Quokka is located. In order to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change directory into Quokka. Now from here, I can say something like git status. And if I say git status, that is going to tell me what has been modified. If you have modified devices.yaml, services, etc., or if you've modified code, then your changes will be represented here. There will be modified and in red, and it will be the files that you have changed. And so if you want to pull down the latest, and we're going to look at this in one way, which would be just to pull down the latest stuff, what you need to do is you need to get rid of everything that's been modified so that Git will allow you to do that. And the way to do that is you can say git stash. What git stash does is it stashes your changes off to the side. You can then later pull them back in by doing a git stash pop. But for now, we're just going to do git stash. And now I'm going to say git status. And git status, notice my modified, what was modified before, is no longer there. Now it's complaining about this file. This is actually the file that gets used, that I use when we do a trace route, and we store this in the process of translating it into something that I can send back to the user interface. So that's we don't have to worry about that right now. I probably should clean that up. But now I should be able to do a git pull, and that's what I'm going to try to do right now. We'll see if that works. Okay, so I'm actually recording this after the current segment where I did a git stash, or I will do, because I'm going to insert this. I'm going to do a git stash and a git pull. And I thought to myself, maybe before I had you guys do that, I should have you do something else. And so let me show you what it is that I'm recommending that you do. Now you can see here what I've done in my services. I've just added a couple of services. I've added this NBC Sports Soccer, this ESPN FC. So I've modified my own services YAML file. And if you've made changes like that to your devices or to your services or whatever it might be, then before you do all of the other stuff, what I might recommend is this. Going to your directory where Quokka is, which is right here. Now I say git status. When I do a git status, you can see, oh, well, I've modified this file. Now, one thing I could do would be to just save that file somewhere and have a backup copy of it. That way, when I do a git pull and it attempts to merge what's out there with what I have done, then I may lose something. Then having a backup copy might be helpful for reference later on. So one thing I could do would be to just copy services, as I say. Another thing to do would be to copy data. If you really want to just get an entire backup copy, you could copy this entire Quokka directory. And so I've actually done a statement here that does that. Let's see. I would do a copy -r recursive of the Quokka directory. Now I'm in Quokka, but underneath Quokka, remember, there's Quokka, which is the Quokka server, and Quokka UI, which is the Quokka UI code. So I'm copying my Quokka server code to something called Quokka back. And if I do that, it's pretty quick doing that copy. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to change directory to quokka-back. And if I look here, this is looking suspiciously exactly like my original quokka. I've got controller, I've got data, I've got models. If I were to dive down into data, then I could see, all right, well, I've got my services here. I could use that as a reference for later on in case something goes haywire. So just a word to the wise, you might want to back up your directory before you begin playing around with your git pull stuff. Now, I do know that we're already working on a different virtual machine. So this is my virtual machine, which I've cloned. And so I should be able to do anything that I want without messing around with or messing up my existing version of quokka. So that's okay. But this will just perhaps make it a little bit easier to progress once you've pulled down the latest code, as we did or we will do. You'll be watching it a little bit later in this segment. But you will at least have everything backed up in case you want to look back at it for reference. Just a word to the wise. And now I'm going to return you to where we were, which was issuing the git pull command in order to pull down the latest quokka code. Well, it looks like it worked. So I'm going to let's see, there's a bunch of stuff that has changed between the previous version and now. There's new files. There's a bunch of stuff going on. If I do git status now, it says that I'm up to date with origin/main. So now I've pulled down stuff from the main branch. At this point in time, I'm considering running quokka, but before I do that, I don't trust that the database has not changed. In fact, I know that the database has changed. And if I run quokka, probably it will partly run and it will partly fail. So I'm going to do what I've mentioned in the quokka walkthrough, which is how you get rid of the database. So I'm going to do a drop db of quokka. So this is going to get rid of all of my data. Sorry, folks, if you wanted to keep all of your data. Code migration is one thing, data migration is a whole nother thing, and that is a huge task. If you look online, there are tools that allow you to do this. Every project I've ever been on that tries to do this, we have an entire engineer devoted full-time to doing migration tasks, or at least almost full-time. So I'm going to get rid of this database, and then I need to create it again. Create db quokka. You got to make sure you type quokka correctly. That's the magic name of our database. So I have no idea if this is going to work, but I'm going to try running quokka and see if I'm going to just say run all and see what happens. Actually, I take that back. I'm not going to. I'm going to just run quokka right now. Let's see what happens when I try to run quokka, because if there are errors, then I will be able to see them in a little bit more isolated manner if I just run the quokka server. So far, this actually looks not bad. It seems to be running okay. It's doing service monitoring. It's doing discovery. It's beginning to do the monitoring of our devices, compliance monitoring, etc. So what I'm going to do is what I tend to do. Oh, by the way, I noticed that I still have this small. I'm going to make it big. I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to open up a new terminal window. And I'm going to get rid of this. Remind me later. I'm going to run the user interface, cd quokka /run UI. That's going to start the user interface. And at this point, I'm going to start a new window, and I'm going to, whoops, there's my user interface. That's too big. All right, let's run our workers here. /run workers. Let's see if these are going to be running okay. I'm getting 200s back. That's a HTTP message that says everything's okay. Notice it does take a while for the user interface, the development server. Remember, this is Node.js. I have a little bit of code that's running, doing JavaScript stuff. But the bulk of the heavy lifting is all done by the framework in which I'm running that provides this Node.js server. And that is what actually is serving up these pages. So look, I've waited long enough that I've got my devices are okay. My services are okay. I said that kind of quickly. My hosts are getting discovered. Let's see, we have 8 devices discovered so far. My workers, my workers, it seems like things are working all right. If I was to go to my services, let's see if I've got the graph database is starting to get filled in. Obviously, I don't have summaries yet. So that's good. Devices, let's make sure that I'm getting device information adequately. Let's see. I don't really have a whole lot of data yet. Let me go back and see if one of my other devices, even though this one is red, it's possible that I have more data. And in fact, I do have more data. These Cisco, they call them always on. And that sometimes is true and sometimes not. Okay, there we go with that. By the way, I just realized, silly me, this is using netconf, and I could never figure out in my netconf how to get CPU utilization and memory utilization. It's probably in there somewhere in the XML, but as you may have noticed, that never really shows up when I do netconf, at least with the code that I've written. Anyway, so now at this point in time, we have an operational VM. It has been upgraded to the version 11-ish. I don't have any internal versioning that goes with Quokka. Probably that's yet another thing that I need to add at some point in time. But you've seen in this little video, at least in this little segment of this video, how have I been able to actually take the original VM and just use Git to download all of the new code. Remember, what did I do? I did a git stash in Quokka, and then I did a git pull. You can go back and re-watch that if you choose to do so. I'm just realizing, unfortunately, I suspect that I've lost it here. Oh, no, there it is. Yeah, here's probably, we can see what I did. I did a git status first, and then when I was done with that, I saw that there was something modified in your situation. You may have made a bunch of things modified. I know I haven't dealt with that yet. Let me deal with that in the next little segment. But we did a git stash to get rid of this. And then I did a git pull. And as you can see, it went out and it pulled down all of this information, all this new data. So you can see there's a lot of lines that have been deleted, lines that have been added, files that have been added, all this worker stuff. Oh, this is even user interface. That's the user interface for my workers screen, the JavaScript code. And then here's my worker thread, Quokka worker, etc. So that is how you would do that. That's probably the first steps. Now the more difficult thing will be, how do you integrate what you've done or try to merge what you've done into what is what you have pulled down, and that's what we will address next. So let's continue with our description of how to potentially upgrade your existing VM to one that supports the latest version of Quokka while not losing your own changes. Now, if you will recall, what we ended up doing was we had this, first we did a git stash to store away our changes, and then we did a git pull and git pull down all of our new quokka code, and it replaced everything that was there. And that's what we've got running right here. I've stopped and restarted quokka, so this is what is available out there on the GitHub site as it exists today. And so it's running that. But remember, in the little intervening portion, little snippet in the last segment, I talked about storing away changes that you had made, and I showed you that I had made changes to services. Now you don't see those changes reflected here because this is the information that came directly from the GitHub site. Now I've done my git stash and I've done my git pull, and what I want to do now is I want to apply those things that have been stashed onto the current existing software that I have loaded right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the things back, or I'm going to pop them off of the stack, of the stash stack. So what I'm going to say is git stash pop. And when I say git stash pop, what it's going to do, it's going to take what I stashed and it is going to attempt to apply that to the existing code base. And hopefully it will do the merge and it will be successful and everything will be happy. So this is probably the best case scenario, although I've not actually done this myself since I'm creating the code myself and I don't encounter this. Let me try this and see if it works. So it says my branch is up to date with origin main. You'll notice it's done a status for me and it's telling me that I have this new services file that is in existence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my quokka server. I do that, as I mentioned, by hitting Control-C twice. If you're doing run all, then what you need to do is do a stop all, and that will do the stop for you. But because, as we mentioned, I'm running the workers separately, I'm running the UI separately, then I end up having to do Control-C twice. Remember, this is what our services looked like. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start quokka back up again. And if we're lucky, then my changes will take effect. And you will see that this is doing. In fact, if I was to just show you here some of the stuff that I'm printing out, you can see, oh, hey, look, I'm monitoring for HTTP, ESPN FC, and NBC Sports Soccer. So I think I have a pretty good idea that this is going to work. Now this is going to update in 32 seconds, but just because I'm impatient, I'm going to click refresh services. And lo and behold, you can see that NBC Sports Soccer as well as ESPN FC have appeared in this list of services. So my changes to the configuration of the services.yaml file, remember that was this file that we were looking at that we saw had been changed, my changes were preserved. Now remember, I mentioned the danger in doing stuff like this. This is my services. If I had actually changed the, if I being Chuck have changed the way that the code works and added new fields or modified the database in some way, then what you would probably have to do is go look at your previous file and compare it to this file and then make the additions using the template that already exists on the quokka code that I have created rather than using what you've done. In other words, if you had, let's say, for some reason that the version that we had originally didn't have this information and it was required, which I believe that it is, then you would have a problem when you went to run it. So you need to make sure that you follow the pattern that has been set here in the latest version of the code. And you also may need to do the delete database, drop database, and create database again. So Let me try to wrap up. So we've talked about a few things. One of the things we talked about using a brand new VM. The other thing we talked about, and just using that, and then if you had made any changes, just redoing them on the new VM. Another alternative would be for you to take your existing VM. I would clone it and call it whatever you want, because you may be in danger of screwing things up and you'd like to keep this one good and pure. And you can go to that new VM, maybe save off the entire directory that has quokka in it so your changes are not messed up. You would go through and do your git, you would do your git stash and then your git pull, and then you would end up checking to see if everything ran. And if it did, then you can potentially attempt to install your changes using git stash pop. Now, I know this is a lot for you to remember if you're expecting this to be a product. This is why it's not a product. It's a software development environment. If you do software development and you get into this, you will end up using Git probably, and things like stash and pull and commit and push and all the other things. I do talk about those, or I will talk about those when I've created the lesson in 52 weeks of Python on software development process tools such as Git and Jira, etc. So I'll go into more detail with that later, but hopefully this has given you enough to know a little bit about what you need to do. If your pop doesn't work, then what you may want to do is start the process over, or just ignore your attempt to pop and use the files that you've saved off in order to manually update whatever files need to be changing. Okay, so hopefully that is giving you a little bit of a background of what you can do. I suspect most of you will probably just go to the new VM. Those of you that are more accomplished developers may want to try the git stash and git pull route just to enhance your understanding of the whole software development process. Thanks and good luck with your quokka.